I think it's actually quite a good segue to something that Amir, you wanted to talk about, companies building the so-called picks and shovels, but is there that much gold being mined? So obviously SSI is another picks and shovels company. It's another big model. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this?
So I'm going to flash this meme on the screen. You can take a look. Basically, it's a tweet that shows a market full of shovel sellers. And somebody comes in and everybody's screaming like, are you a miner? Are you a miner? And he says, no, I'm here to sell shovels. The key here is that everybody's trying to build tools for developers that are building AI and agents. And I'm not seeing a reciprocal adoption by enterprises. Now, it could be that this is okay, and this is the time, and this is how things work. But what I'm seeing is a little bit of starvation. So a lot of frameworks, a lot of infrastructure for building AI agents and enterprise solutions. But I'm not seeing enough customers in enterprise saying, yes, this is what I need. I'm more seeing customers in enterprise saying, I don't know what I need and I don't know how to use AI. My manager told me to use AI, but I actually don't know what to do. So I'm hoping for the market to correct itself and for the pull from the market for enterprises to actually being able to use AI in a useful way. But that's not what I'm seeing right now in the market.
Of course, this whole metaphor, Amir, is about gold rushes, right? Like in a gold rush, you have the people selling the picks and shovels and the people digging the gold out of the ground. And it makes me wonder what would have happened in the old gold rush era if you had lots of venture capitalists just waiting there to fund the pick and shovel makers. Would you have ended up with the same situation, right? Because actually, the whole concept of picks and shovels comes from the fact that the people who really reliably got rich in a gold rush were the people selling the picks and shovels. So it seems like a smart business idea, but the reason that was the case is that most people in a gold rush were trying to get gold. And it's nearly like the picks and shovels metaphor or model has become overplayed. And if everyone's like, oh, I'm not going to mine for gold, that's too hard, it's too risky, it's too dangerous, I'm just going to quietly get rich selling picks and shovels. Well, if everyone does it, it doesn't work. A gold rush needs to be based on people digging gold out of the ground. And I think, again, most of these businesses are not good investments because most of them will fail. They're not getting enough traction. There aren't enough people using them. Question for me is this perhaps a necessary overinvestment that will actually fuel the gold rush ultimately? And, I think I mentioned this in a fairly recent episode. It's a sort of historical analog that I can't get out of my head, which is back in the dot-com boom. There was this huge boom in laying fiber optic cable. The companies like WorldCom just like getting huge amounts of funding, laying cable, saying, okay, the internet, the information superhighway is coming. Everyone's going to need bandwidth, and we're going to lay all this cable. And they spent tens, hundreds of billions of dollars, God knows how much, laying all this fiber optic cable that, guess what, no one needed yet, right? Because the internet boom was still more of a dream or like a vision of a future gold rush than the current gold rush. And so they all went bust. That was part of the tech wreck, massive overinvestment in infrastructure. And yet, the modern internet that took off in the 2000s and 2010s was only made possible because there was this huge amount of infrastructure assets that had basically already been, discharged through bankruptcy that everyone could take advantage of. So that infrastructure, terrible investment for the people who actually invested in it. If you take this macro view of, was it a good allocation of capital for the world? Hell yeah, right? So is that happening now? Like, is it necessary in order to enable normal people, normal companies to take advantage of AI, to have this huge flourishing of infrastructure investment that ultimately all that IP is probably most of it's going to end up in bankruptcy, but then it can rise from the ashes and then provide real value to the next wave and really drive that gold rush.
The typical cycle, right, of like birth, death, rebirth.
Is that a typical cycle?
It is the typical cycle, yeah, of people getting reborn from the ashes of the last generation or of the benefits and the success of the last generation. And it's also the typical hype cycle curve, right, where we go through that trough of despair. Everyone's like disillusioned. It didn't really materialize. And then it slowly but surely becomes real over years and years and years. The only difference here, I think, with AI is that it seems to be kind of happening faster than ever. I think, Yaniv, it was you that coined this idea of many, many episodes ago of like, this is a platform shift and revolution at TikTok speed, right? It's just going to happen faster than ever before. Amir, you talked about enterprises not adopting this thing and therefore the picks and shovels maybe laying fallow and sitting by the stream and not finding any gold, to keep the metaphor going. I think phase one is all about experiments. It's like people playing around, creating little experiments, seeing what this thing can do. Phase 2 is the major software companies adopting it into their core tools, right? Google and Microsoft and what have you. And then enterprise adopting it through those tools. Well, we already use Microsoft Teams, we already use Office, we already use Google. We get AI for free, more or less, right? Maybe for a few bucks a seat. Phase 3, which is always the slowest phase, is going to be legacy enterprises around the rest of the world adopting it in their core business, writing custom AI or applying frontier models to their proprietary datasets and use cases. And that's always going to go slower than everybody else. The thing that, continues to strike me is that historically, Silicon Valley has taxed a lot of the economic value creation globally. And pick your number. 1 out of every $10, 3 out of every $10, 5 out of every $10, I don't know what. But someone out here once said to me, why are you trying to help these old media companies? My company at the time was trying to help old incumbents in the media world. He's like, our job at Silicon Valley is to disrupt the old players and to tax them for the benefit. And that's so true. Like a lot of economic value passes through Silicon Valley systems, and those systems tax the world. I think in the next cycle, the AI cycle, whatever you believe that number to be now, probably double it. So if it was $3 or $5, I think it's going to be $6 or $8 or $9 out of every 10 is going to run through Silicon Valley. Particularly if you think about intellectual labor as a service, right? Intelligence as a service. Well, hey, just use our fancy new, intelligence layer, replace half your workforce, or don't double your workforce, just outsource it to Silicon Valley. Whether it's now, 6 months from now, or 6 years from now, because these large enterprises are moving slowly, Silicon Valley is going to beat them to the punch and tax them for the privilege. The slower they go, the richer I think Silicon Valley gets. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. That's what's happening.
I tend to agree. But we need to see who makes money and who spends the money, because I think what you're saying is true. It will take time for enterprise to adopt this. But the question is, if you're a startup and you raised $40 million in your seed money in order to build something crazy useful, but the expectation is that you will meet that valuation in 3 years, you might starve because the enterprises will not be there to actually use your solution in a useful way. So I'm saying what the Silicon Valley is saying is adoption should happen in the next 3 years because we're investing all this money in making these solutions. So it's either going to be that the big companies will win again, which is my bet. So a lot of the big companies will buy the small companies and have enough timeline to meet the demand when it comes. Or we're going to see another chasm of delusion where the next wave of companies, the next wave of startups are going to reap the value that the current startups are doing.
But I think this happens the same way almost every time, which is, Taxi didn't adopt iPhone, Uber did. Hilton didn't adopt phones, Airbnb did. Blockbuster didn't adopt the new business model in streaming, Netflix did. And so there will be a whole bunch of disruption and collateral damage for, I think, B2C companies that are the next generation healthcare, insurance, finance, banking companies. This is what we talk about, what I talk about on this show incessantly, which is B2B is interesting, but B2B is in propping up incumbents. It's just helping companies do the legacy thing they do a little bit better. B2C is way more interesting to me. It is almost, in my mind, the thing you can classify as disruption. It is disrupting the legacy players. So those legacy enterprise companies that are refusing or unable or unwilling to act, and we have a whole episode about the innovator's dilemma just a few episodes back in our catalog, yet more of them will fall to the AI pure play native companies. More will fall this cycle. Yeah. Than last cycle, and on and on and on.
But just to be clear, Chris, these B2C companies, they're the gold miners. The problem is, to Amir's point, is there aren't that many gold miners out there at the moment. Everyone is making tools for the disruptors to disrupt, and yet there are not enough disruptors disrupting. I think really the question here is this a bubble that will burst in the sense of you're going to have like an AI version of the tech wreck, you're going to have like huge numbers of these companies shutting down, you're going to have funds that specialize in AI going out of business? Again, out of the ashes, will that be reborn? Or is this something that we can proceed without there being that kind of massive crisis?
Yeah, I don't think we need to be sitting here in suspense. Yes, there will be a big explosion. Many of them will die, but many of them are also, they're not building tools for startups, they're building tools for enterprises. And that's my point, which is there's an overabundance of enterprise tooling. Really, the enterprises are probably too slow for this cycle, and some of these are going to die. And there's a lot of, Me Too's and also rans. And what I'm personally more curious and interested about is the native AI companies that will disrupt the status quo And they're not necessarily going to be using the picks and shovels, or certainly not going to be using the enterprise grade picks and shovels. They're going to be using, the decomposable cloud services, the lightweight open source. They're going to compose stuff that's really bespoke and fit for purpose to build a next generation healthcare or insurance company, while Kaiser Permanente or whatever is like screwing around with bureaucracy. Now, to Amir's point, some or many of those will get acquired, keeping the incumbents incumbent, but they're not going to probably be driving the bulk of the innovation by adopting many of these enterprise tools.
I think time will tell, but I think what we'll see is a cycle of innovators. I hope it will match by a lot of demand. I actually think that the demand will come once a few good examples will happen. So a few innovators will actually show what good looks like. If you remember Angry Bird, if you remember Uber did that for mobile, showed people what good looks like. And then we will see a wide adoption of this, just like we did with the mobile revolution.
All right, guys, that's our thoughts. Join us in the comments and discuss this with us. How do you think the cycle will play out? Who do you think will be the winners and losers? And how should founders think about this to navigate to success? We'll join you there.